Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Wagar on Writing. I'm beginning to get a little bit smoother at this now. But fantastic to see a whole bunch of you already in the chat. That's fantastic. So Chris, Surreal, Raz Zenith, Lightning Wing 92, and Bograt. Excellent. So welcome to you all. Good to have you on stream. That's fantastic. Thank you very much for supporting me in my early days of Twitch streaming. We'll get there as well. Oh, we've got Commander Terra Firma as well. Good to see you. Hopefully we'll have a few guests along tonight as well. A few other people have been kind of twittering to me during the week, and that they may pop along as well, which would be quite interesting. So so this week, what have I been doing? More writing. Not surprisingly. Got to keep my hand in, keep working on it. So I'm still working on Shadewood 3 at the moment, which is the third part of my epic sci-fi, my own sci-fi story, if you like. Really must get that finished. Otherwise, all my other projects are going to kind of back up. So that's been busy. Work's been busy. It's been really hot. It's still warm here today. It's about 27 in my study, so I do have the window open. So if you hear any strange dog barking or anything like that, then that'll be why. As it's very warm. It's very warm. I haven't got aircon in my house, which is something I always regret about this time every year. But there we go. Never mind. So, a topic for this evening actually is how to plan a novel, which is going to be quite interesting actually. So I think you're going to get some interesting stuff on there. Question, did you get my documents? Yes, I did. So yes, I've actually got a queue of them now, which is excellent. We've got enough material there, probably 4 or 5 episodes of doing a little bit of the surgery idea I had. So yeah, thanks very much, Steve. Document received A-OK. Quite a few other people have chucked them in as well. So I'm going to start scheduling some of those up. But I do need to take some time to read them. I don't want to kind of do them live, critiquing them on the stream without having read them first, because I want to make sure that gives me a little bit of time to review them. So yes, we will definitely be doing some of that critiquing stuff if you're happy. But I do want to make sure I give it enough attention in advance of doing it, rather than kind of try and critique things by the seat of my pants, which is probably a bit unfair to you guys and not very easy for me. So we'll work on that. That'd be good. So planning a novel. This is and before I start, a lot of people will say, quite rightly actually, that's an approach to producing a book, and they're quite right. You don't have to plan a novel. Some people, and I've got another author friend of mine who some of you will be familiar with, Stuart Aiken, who he's what we call a pantster. So I'm a plotter and he's a pantster. And some people like to write literally by the seat of the pants. That's where the phrase comes from. And they've got an idea in their head, quite rough, really. Just want to tell a story. And some people will just literally open the document, start typing, writing, however they do it, and just go for it, and then kind of keep writing. Now I can't do that. That's a skill I haven't got. So I find if I do that, I end up writing myself into a corner, and then I find I have to go back and change things, and it drives me to distraction, because I much prefer to have a plan, and go from beginning to end. It also helps me be a little bit more metronomic in the way I write my stories. I know roughly how long it's going to take me to write a book, so I can give quite accurate predictions as to when it will be out, apart from when things go wrong. And my plans all go wrong as well. What I'm going to talk about this evening is my approach to planning a novel. So I do plan, and I plan to the nth degree, compared to quite a lot of other authors. So this isn't, you must do it this way. This is an explanation of the way I do it, which may appeal to some of you, may not appeal to some of you. So take it like that. This is not a you must do it this way, because that would be daft. It is entirely permissible, and in fact, some of the best books have been written by people who just literally words off a page, and just keep writing as the ideas flow out of their mind. That doesn't work for me. Might work for you. Your mileage may vary, as the Americans say. We'll have to wait and see. And a few other people popped in, and Mr. Snoswell, good, lovely to see you, sir. Thank you very much for popping in. Week off and work delays. Well, that's hey, that's life. hope young Alvin is well. I've missed him. I haven't seen him for ages, so that'd be good. And I can't read that because it's in green text. Meg, good grief, my eyesight. Hang on, I'm just going to squint at the screen. Magnificent, is that Magnificent Mako? Hello, sir. Your username's come up in bright green on a white background on my screen. I can't read it. But welcome anyway. So there we go. It's fantastic. So keep dropping bits and pieces in the chat. I'll get round to them. So I thought what I could do to show you my planning, and I thought some of you would probably find this interesting because you know me, many of you, from Elite Dangerous. I thought I would show you the plan that I used for my original Elite novel back in 2014. So that's Elite Dangerous Reclamation. Now, fortunately, the IP for that is entirely 100% mine. That's the way the original kind of Kickstarter writer licenses worked. So I can show you that without any issues about NDAs and stuff. Unfortunately, I can't do that for Premonition because I wrote it in with a different arrangement. So that's not actually my IP. But there we go. So that's good. And a couple of people turned up. Some CO UK. Oh, hi, Katrina. Good to meet you online. Anyway, we swapped a few ideas. Katrina's actually written a quite a nice little story, actually, which I was giving a little bit of feedback on. So hopefully that was useful for you, Katrina. End result of that is just make sure you keep writing. Definitely some talent there. Lots of stuff you can do. So well done. and my office is nowhere near as tidy. Actually, this isn't my office, strictly speaking, Mike. This is actually sort of shared with my wife and my son's girlfriend now, who kind of they've been working from home and stuff. So all the stuff behind me is actually, I can blame it on my wife. My bit's tidy, so you can blame it on Anita. But there we go. So shattered illusion. No, actually, to be honest, my bit isn't very tidy either at the moment because I've got bits of paper and books everywhere, which is kind of authentic, really. But there we go. So, but never mind. Anyway, I'm waffling again. So let's get on with having a look at what this is all about. So I'm going to swap to my other stuff. Desktop focus. There we go. All right. So hopefully you can still see me. Now, this document here is actually the one that I submitted to Michael Brooks, nonetheless, who back in, I think it must have been, when was the Kickstarter? 2012, wasn't it? So early 2013, I must have written this up and sent it across to Michael Brooks and said, this is what I'm going to write for Frontier based on the Kickstarter stuff. And this is basically what they approved and said, yes, we're happy that your plot is okay. And yes, you can go off and do stuff. So this is the final document. This went through quite a few variations on stuff, and I'll take you through some of those little changes with it because some of them are quite interesting. But this is basically how I plan. So actually, this document's sort of upside down in some ways because what I do is I establish the characters first. So down here, you will see. If I can get my screen to work, there we go. Here are all the characters in the story. Now, obviously, I'm hoping that if you're familiar with Elite Reclamation, you'll be familiar with it. But what I've done is I've broken them into major characters and significant minor characters. So under major characters, you'll find no surprises here that you've got Kahina and Salome. You've got Patron Dolk. You've got Hassan, Octavia Quinton, and Luciano Luco Prestigio Giovanni. So I absolutely start with the characters. And if we click on, let's start with, in this case, let's start with Luco. So I like to work with a bit of artwork as well. So when I've got characters in my head, I surf around the internet looking for images that, for me, feel like they look like the character. And some of these I actually bought them so I could actually use them for promotional materials and stuff. So this is one I did actually buy. Your image of Luco may be entirely different to this. A lot of people say he's probably a bit older, maybe a bit more Italian, but I was trying to go for a kind of Italian-y, sort of slightly charming kind of guy you probably wouldn't let loose of your wife because you'd be a bit worried. That's kind of the vibe I had in mind for Luco. And then I write, in this case, a little bit of a short description about what they like. He's a short man, Italian heritage, well-built, tough, stucky. He's got stuck on a planet for 20 years, hyperdrive failure, and he's a bit rough around the edges as a result of that. Key mannerisms. So what do you like in general? What sort of things would you notice about him if you bumped into him? So he's very laid back, doesn't get angry, he's very accommodating, he's very philosophical. But he's clever, he's calculating, doesn't like fighting, but he can if the needs arise. His Italian accent is very strong, and his English is a shade better than passable. So I'm trying to get him, a character all of his own before we even start writing the story. What's he like? What would you notice when you first met him? All that kind of good stuff. So here's his profile. Luco's an old-school trader with an old-school ship. He's got a wealth of experience, but he's been stuck here for 20 years, and he's become a bit of an amateur philosopher in that time. He's very judgmental about the Imperials, doesn't really like them. He speaks English better than most of the natives, he said he does. So there was a sort of Han Solo-ish vibe, I suppose. I tried to get away from that a bit because Han Solo was kind of, your lovable rogue. I suppose Luco is a bit in that mold, to be honest. But here's the other thing that I wanted. I did want to, and I'm not a major diversity flag waver, but I do like to have a realistic range of characters in my stories. And I certainly thought by the 34th century, which of course when this book is set, that would have all sorts of variations on diversity out there, and hopefully people wouldn't be quite so upset about it as they are now. So having a kind of Italian chap just kind of appealed to me. Oddly enough, his name, and this is a good little side story. And those of you who watch my streams will appreciate we quite often end up in side stories. His name actually came from a taxi driver I was once scared to death, almost scared to death by in Rome. Who I asked him. I came out of a meeting and I had only about 40 minutes to get to the airport from the centre of Rome, and basically in those days you didn't have much security at the airport. You could just sort of turn up and run to the flight. 40 minutes from the centre of Rome to Rome Fiumicino Airport, and if any of you ever know that, you know what that's like in the rush hour. Anyway, came out of the meeting, flagged down a taxi, jumped in the back and said, I've got to get to the airport in 40 minutes or I'm going to miss my flight. And the guy and he was driving this horrible old Fiat something saloon, really rubbishy car. And he sort of just leant back in his chair and he clicked his fingers like that. And he just said, Lucio Presti Giovanni will get you to the airport on time. And then just wheel spin and stuff like this. And he was sliding around roundabouts backwards and all sorts. I was utterly terrified. I thought I was going to die. And anyway, he got me to the airport on time. I got the flight. But the name Lucio Presti Giovanni sort of stuck in my brain ever since. So sometimes characters get names because just something happened to you. That's where Luco came from, that name. So I hope there's still a taxi driver somewhere in Rome who's still alive. This was probably about 20 years ago now, but so that's kind of the inspiration for the character. And sometimes you just meet people, and that's just perfect fodder for that kind of stuff. So spend some time on your characters, work out what they're like. I do quite like to work with images. I'll show you a few other bits and pieces in a moment as well. To build up your characters, get to know them, what they like as people. I must admit, after working with the characters in Elite Reclamation, obviously over 4 years, and in Shadewood, a similar length of time, my characters are so familiar with me. I mean, it's occasionally, and this sounds slightly dodgy actually, but it's slightly weird. I do occasionally dream about them, very rarely now, but certainly when I was working hard on Elite Reclamation, they did pop up in my dreams very often because you're spending so much time envisaging these characters that they almost become real to you. And a lot of readers will occasionally send you emails saying your characters are really, really real, and almost they get to that point. They're so familiar to you that they almost are real in a really weird sort of sense. And when you're a writer, your brain sort of does entertain the thoughts of these imaginary people, obviously, but they become more than just a sum of words on the page. It's quite weird. So maybe that taxi driver's watching this. That would be quite scary. How do you find your people? This is an interesting one. They do sort of pop into my head a bit. So I'll come up with an idea of a sort of character. I generally come up with a scene. I think, wouldn't it be fun if we had a guy who did that, or a girl who did this, or a woman who did that? And what would happen if that situation played it out? And some of the earlier stuff I do, the kind of prototyping, is a scene where there's a conflict or an argument or a problem or something between some characters, and I just stick them in and start writing it and see what comes out. Sometimes it's rubbish, and sometimes I think, quite like this character. This is quite interesting. So start with a scene. Definitely works for me. It's not the only way. Sometimes the character just kind of pops in. In fact, on Elite Dangerous, the next one up here, Octavia Quinton, who actually, the original picture of her, she was a brunette. She actually turned out to be blonde in the later versions of the book. This was actually somebody else generated for me as part of my Kickstarter Pledge Awards. She's just a really, really nasty piece of work. So she is one of those fairly relatively unusual, actually, kind of lead baddie in the story. She's the main antagonist who goes around. She's kind of got the Darth Vader school of employee relations, really. And she's very unpleasant. But she was actually designed by somebody else. This is actually not my character, but she was a good character. Quite enjoyed writing for her as well. And then in this case, Hassan, who's kind of the youngish pilot of the spacecraft. He's quite naive. He starts out quite kind of not really sure of himself. He's got an old knackered ship. He's trying to make his way in the universe, and he kind of struggles with that. He's trying to impress people, but he's not really up to the job at the beginning of the book. But he knows he can be more than he actually is. He does look a bit like Russell Brand in this shot, yes, which is a bit scary. But he was deliberately designed to kind of appeal to the original elite game player. So here's a guy who's kind of in the same situation you are when you start the game, i.e. you've got a rubbish ship and you haven't got much money, you don't really know what the hell's going on. So the idea is that the reader would associate with him and feel his sort of pain. He's trying to make his way. He takes a few risks and gets himself into more trouble as a result. That's problematic for him. So yeah, he means well. He intended to send money home to a poor family, but his good intentions are frustrated by his devil-may-care approach and his impatience. So he gets impatient, and that gets him into a whole bunch of trouble. And then we've got Dolk, who's kind of... Dolk actually in some ways was my favourite character from the whole of Reclamation, because I deliberately wrote this guy so you didn't know whose side he was on. In fact, what happens to this guy is he doesn't realise by the end which side he's on either. So he's a little bit more of a nuanced character. At the beginning, he appears to be serving the Imperials, and he's kind of stopping Kahina from being manipulated by her own family. And then he betrays, or apparently betrays her, and then he's trying to keep her alive, and then he's trying to kill her again, and then at the end, he does betray her a second time, and she does away with him. So, he's quite an interesting bit. He kind of forgets what he's fighting for along the way through the story. So, he thinks he's doing the right thing, but he almost outwits himself. So that's quite an interesting thing. But he's got a lot of experience. He's sort of the wise. He's a bit of a, I suppose, if you're going to go for a Star Wars lineup, he's kind of the Obi-Wan type kind of stuff. So, I was deliberately trying to. Oh, and thanks for Terra Firma. That's exactly what I was aiming for. Actually, I'm trying to make him somebody think, well, whose side is this guy on? Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? He's obviously really, really capable. What's he trying to do? Is he trying to keep Kahina alive? Is he trying to kill her? What's he trying to? What's his objective? And he sort of is playing so many roles and spinning so many plates that he kind of loses his way in that process as well. And then obviously our main heroine. This is one of the early images actually that we use, which is probably a bit too moody for Kahina. She's not quite that kind of scowly, but she is the third daughter of an imperial father. She is bitter and twisted as a result of being the third daughter. Her two older siblings make her life an absolute misery, although she's actually the most intelligent of them. And so she's pretty unpleasant as a character. She's deliberately designed to not be the kind of likeable princess that gets rescued by everybody. She doesn't want to be rescued at all. In fact, she goes out of her way to put herself into harm's way because she doesn't really care. So she's basically sitting there waiting to be married off, and she's really resenting that position in life. She's stuck in this imperial family. They have utter privilege and loads of money and everything they could possibly ask for other than a meaningful existence. So that's kind of where she starts her story. And she hates her father, she hates her sisters, she hates her mother, she has utter contempt for everything about her, and she's bitter and twisted about it. And that's where she starts. And then she gets into this mess with everybody else that transpires in the story, and obviously that story goes on and on and on for quite a long time. She actually, I hadn't originally planned in the story for her to lose her memory in the way she did, but it was a natural way out of the way the story was. So for those of you who don't know the story, what happens to Kahina is that in the early part of the story, she actually gets killed. But due to the way that technology in the 34th century works, she's not dead, she's just sort of mostly dead. if that makes sense. And she's able to be revived, but during that revival process, the people who revive her don't restore her memory correctly, and so she can speak and she can, she can remember some stuff, but she can't remember who she is. And then in that state, she encounters, everybody else, and has to try and figure out what's going on, and then obviously has a whole bunch of adventures. So, and there we go. So that's all fun. So yeah, we get ultimately frustrated by a pointless life. She's aggressive and sharp-tongued, manipulative, with a cutting wit she uses to great effect to the distress of her sisters. So she's actually quite nasty. While she is the protagonist of the story, she's not likable. She actually goes out of her way to be cruel and quite nasty to her sisters. She doesn't just not like them, she goes out of her way to cause them distress. And that was quite a deliberate choice on my part. I didn't want her to be a kind of, oh, feel sorry for the princess because she's had a hard life. I wanted you to think, yeah, she's had a hard life and she's not actually all that nice anyway because of it. And, you feel a certain amount of sympathy for her, but you also kind of, no, I don't really like this character. So she's an unsympathetic heroine in this sense. And she makes some very bad judgment calls along the way as well. And I think that's one of the things you need to consider when you're looking at characters. You've got to make them not perfect. There's a big failure that new writers can drop into, which is the what's called in writing circles as the Mary Sue. I think there's a male version of that, but I can't remember what it's called. So if somebody knows in the stream, let me know. But Mary Sue is the perfect character. So if you took a Mary Sue character, it would be take a woman. She would be gorgeous to look at. She'd be physically perfect. She'd be able to run and sprint and jump and double backflip and without breaking a sweat. She'd always know the right answer. She'd always charm all the men. She'd always win every argument. She'd always be beautiful and charming and patient and lovely and sickening basically. So that's and quite often. Particularly younger and less experienced writers will sort of write themselves into the story, kind of subconsciously or sometimes even deliberately. So a male author may write himself in as the hero that saves all the princesses. A female writer may write herself as the vulnerable woman who gets saved by the dashing hero. And it's a sort of self-fulfilling kind of fantasy story rather than it is an actual story about an individual. So do be careful that you don't generate a Mary Sue character. If you have a character that always wins, or if you have a character that always has the answers, or you have a character that is physically just, perfect in every single way, you've got to ask yourself, is that really a realistic character? And there's quite a few guides online to checking whether or not you've got a Mary Sue in your book. And if you answer too many questions with yes, then you probably need to have a think about that character again. Characters should be very flawed. They can certainly have very, very positive attributes. So, for example, I made Kahina here an expert swordswoman, partly because there was a dueling tradition in the Empire, and I thought that would be a useful thing to her to have. But it doesn't mean she can't be beaten in a fight. And it doesn't mean that she can fight her way out of every single situation. So you've got to nuance a character. If you have somebody who is charming and clever, there should be a flip side to that, in which case they're manipulative, perhaps, and those sort of things. So in this case, Kahina is she is clever, and but there's a darker, nastier side to her as well, which is not so pleasant as well. Questions coming in, unless you're going for a sarcastic spoof. Yes. Well, if you're writing a comedy, then yeah, you can kind of break that rule a little bit. A Mary Sue in comedy is probably quite acceptable, as long as the other characters are aware of the Mary Sue-ness going on. And is it realistic for a character, or am I working for Disney? Well, I think, that's a good way of looking at it. If you're writing sometimes for a younger audience, you might want to consider how complex your characters want to be. It depends who you're writing for. Not to say that kids' characters can't be complicated, but generally more obvious goodies and baddies are helpful in some of those kind of areas. But if you're writing a more complex book, and at its heart, Elite Reclamation was more political drama than it was anything else. You want characters who are a bit grey. You're not sure whether they're really good or bad. And to be honest, none of them are really good or bad at all. They've just got their own agenda. And I think that's a very important thing for this kind of story, is that nobody thinks they're the baddie. They'll have an agenda to do. Now, for example, let's go back to Octavia Quinton for a moment. Now, she's the obvious baddie in this book, but she's not really a baddie. What she's figured out is that there's a way to prolong her life. She's got more money than she can possibly ever use. She's got more power than she can obviously ever use. But what she can't stop is aging. And she's found the one way to extend her lifespan indefinitely, and that just happens to be capturing Kahina and basically taking over her body and transferring her consciousness across. Now, that is her objective, and she sees everything else that stops her doing that as basically something to be shoved aside. Now, is that bad, or is that just, as Terraformers just said there, perfect timing, is that just a point of view? So Octavia Quinton has an objective. She wants to live forever to maintain her power base. She's going to do everything she possibly can to do that, and anybody who gets in the way is effectively either a tool or is disposable in that objective. And that's where she is coming from. So that's bad from the perspective of everybody else. But from her perspective, she's saying, well, I've brought stability to hundreds of star systems by my rule. My rule must continue. Therefore, that's what I'm going to do. So that's her objective. Hassan lies and cheats and steals his way out of trouble. He just wants to make some money. So he's not really good, not really bad. Patron Dolk here is trying, at least at the start of the book, he's trying to re-establish the rule of law to the rightful, as he sees it, heirs of the Prism system. But he's not too scrupulous in who he uses in order to achieve that. So he will use and cajole everybody to that end to try and achieve something he's after. And Kahina really doesn't care about anybody right at the start. She's just vindictive and nasty. And then she decides by the end of the book that, damn all this, if I'm in charge and my father's now dead, I'm going to have the Prism system back for me. And that becomes her objective. So are any of them good? Are any of them bad? No, they're just people who are trying to achieve something. And the only one who possibly is vaguely good is Luco, but he doesn't really want to achieve anything other than get off the rock where he's been stuck for 20 years. So once he achieves that, he's fairly laid back and he's fairly happy. So are they goodies, are they baddies? They're not really. And that may be important for your story. You don't necessarily want to have goodies and baddies in your story. You may want to. For example, in my latest book, Lords of Midnight, there are goodies and baddies, but that's not to say the goodies are perfect. They're flawed, and they will argue and they'll disagree and they'll make mistakes. And that's an important consideration. If your characters never make mistakes, people won't sympathise with them. If your characters don't have flaws and make dodgy decisions, people won't sympathise with them. People won't remember them. For example, right at the end of the story, Kahina here makes a really, really big mistake and orders an attack on her home planet, which kills thousands of people. Which gave me an opportunity to pick that up in the next book, her racked with guilt over the fact that she didn't realise at the time what she was doing. But, she's got to live with that thousands of people die because she just said, oh, I want it back, and it's mine. And she has to, be responsible for the decisions she makes. So, that sort of stuff is quite important. And then you've got your kind of supporting cast. So that's all the major characters, the 5 there, and then minor characters here. I didn't go into quite so much detail because I know I didn't needed it, but I've got for every other character roughly what they look like, what do they do, what's their backstory. And I'd really encourage you, if planning like this does work for you, that you go through and work out who's doing what. And if you find yourself in a situation where you've got to introduce a new character because you think, I just need something else to push the scene in, if they've got any reason for being there other than just scene padding, work out roughly who they are, what they do, and where they come from, because you find that you can go back to it and reuse it. And every so often I had to go back and go, what does that character look like? What do they do again? And it was useful here to be able to go back and just say, yes, I know what they're like, because that's important. So that's kind of characters. So we spent a bit of time on there. For me, characters are the big thing. If you get your characters right, the story kind of will work. Because, if you put, for example, Kahina and Dolk in a room and get them to argue about something, then, the characters will start to develop from that kind of thing. It's quite important to do that sort of stuff. Let's go back up to the top. So the summary here. So let's just say this is the document I sent off to Frontier. So now, for any of you who are familiar with Elite, you won't need to know this, but it was worth it for me to just summarize the backstory. And if you're going to write a book, you're going to be writing a story. Now, that story is a point in time where your story begins, and obviously a point in time where your story ends. But that's just because you're writing a book about that bit. Stories never really start and stop. So you do have to give some consideration to what happened before your story started. So, I did this. I mean, we know, most of us on this thread will know about Elite, but for those of you who are not, Elite Reclamation is set in the year 3300 AD. Mankind's reached for the stars and has colonized a bubble of space about 200 light years in diameter out from Earth. Okay, so that's the setup. Okay, it's spaceships, it's out there, we're moving out to space. We've clearly got some kind of advanced technology. Humanity split into two main factions. There's a Federation, which is a bit like a modern United States, and then there's the Empire, which is a bit like the Roman Empire mixed with the British Empire. Huzzah! At the height of its power. So you've got these two power blocks. So there's a bit of politics there, obviously. There's a third, more recent faction. This is the Alliance, which is kind of a bit like the European Union and almost as powerless. He's a slight political satire there. And the only reason that they formed is they basically got upset with the Federation and the Empire, wandering in and taking over their planets. And beyond that is less and less well-governed worlds, the independent worlds. And beyond that is unexplored space, which we call the frontier. Now, again, that should be familiar to anybody who's played Elite. But if you're not familiar with Elite, you've kind of already got the basic concept. Okay, so there's major political blocks in the center around Earth, historic areas. Around that, you've got less governed places, and then beyond that, it gets more and more chaotic until you get out to deep space where there isn't anything out there that's been explored. So you've kind of got the setup. And I make a little mention here. There's an aura of mystique and romance associated with the frontier, but there's danger too. There's at least one alien race out there, possibly more. The known race is called the Thargoids, which everybody's familiar with. But crucially, particularly in this case, they don't feature in this story. I was very clear with Frontier that I didn't want to muck about with the Thargoids. I know one of the other books did, but I didn't want to go there. So that's your background. And that's worth having regardless of what you're writing. I've just summarized it there really for my own benefit. Where is it happening? Okay, so location. So I defined here most of the actions taking place in a particular place. This helped me kind of lock it all down. There's a habitable world. It's a moon of a system, and we go around various other places as well. So I've already mentioned the politics. One thing I did do here is that suddenly we've invented a new type of hyperdrive technology, which is the one that shows up in the game. And we need tantalum to make that work, which means suddenly tantalum is in short supply. So there's a sort of tantalum rush on, which means it's in high demand. So anybody who's got tantalum is in a position of power, which gives you an idea of how the sort of political trading stuff starts to go along. And there's some, the Empire is in control of this moon, but there's a resistance movement there because the Empire sort of took over the moon rather ungraciously. And there's terrorist activity going on. So you're now starting to get a feel that there's a bit of discontent and stuff that's going on around the story before you even start. A little bit about technology. So again, if you're writing a science fiction novel, what sort of science fiction novel are you writing? What does the technology do? What does it allow you to do? Definitely worth setting out some of the rules in advance. And one of the things for Elite was obviously that the rules have been set already by David Braben and Michael Brooks. And so in this case, I was talking about just reiterating that. And then, so we've got lasers, missiles, shields, hyperspace, fairly ordinary common stuff. One little nod there is there isn't any anti-gravity in the Elite universe. So unlike your kind of Star Wars and Star Trek, when you're inside a spaceship, you can't just walk around casually like you see in the movies. People are floating free unless they've got sort of magnetic boots, which does change the story a little bit in some places. There's holograms, there's a little bit of artificial intelligence, but not very much. And trade between systems is handled by large and small ships. Piracy is a bit of a problem. and the small ships follow a sort of 19th century tramp steamer style model of trading between ports. So probably not all that realistic for the 34th century, but it's the way the game works, that small traders buzz between systems carrying cargo, which means they get preyed upon by pirates and bounty hunters and da 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 da. So that's the game. That's how the story works. So the story has to be faithful to that kind of thing. So did I hunt around the Gal map for that specific system, Prism? No, I didn't. Come to that one, because that's quite interesting. In fact, I'll go back in time a little bit and show you some other bits in a moment. So that's the technology, and then the people. So Elite Reclamation primarily concerns the people of the Empire, mixed with a handful of other representatives. Now, I deliberately chose the Empire because A, nobody else was doing it, and B, I thought they were quite interesting because whilst we've got the United States as a sort of superpower here on the Earth today, and we've got democracies, and we've got kind of ideological royal houses stuff on the Earth. What we don't have is we don't have an imperial government on the Earth anymore. We certainly used to with the Roman times and the British Empire. We don't have that anymore. So I thought it might be quite fun to write about a imperial style thing. So the Empire is very, honor is very important. And a good phrase here, it's extremely important to be seen to be doing the right thing, perhaps more so than actually doing the right thing, which I thought summarized the Imperials quite well in the story. And there are many rules of etiquette, both written and unwritten, which gives you a feel that society is very appearance sensitive. Very little is actually illegal in the Empire. Slavery is permitted, for example, even encouraged in some areas, though certain weapon types and drugs are frowned upon. So it's a very different society. It has different rules to the sort of stuff that we're used to, which is quite important as well. So going on to this point about where. So and what you've got to realise about Elite Reclamation is I wrote this long before Elite Dangerous, the game, existed. So there was no Gal map at all. Didn't exist. So I came up with... here we have the problem with the star map. So I just sort of did this in Paint. So this is my original map of what I thought the galaxy was kind of going to look like, with just my kind of main location kind of penciled in on it. So I knew there'd be Sol, which is where the Earth is, and Akanar in this case is the center of the Empire. And then the prison system would be somewhere on the way out towards the frontier. My key consideration for the story is it shouldn't be anywhere too close to the centre, because it was designed to be out on the edge near the frontier. But it would sort of be stuck a little bit between the Empire and the Federation in a sort of almost like a neutral zone-y type sort of place where both sides might be vying for it. And then what I did with this is I sent that off to Michael Brooks and said, this is the sort of configuration I would like for its location. He said, yeah, we'll take that into consideration and see what we can do when the game comes out. Okay, cool. So that's what I did. And then obviously for the individual systems, what I did is I locked down what it would actually be like. Now, being a slightly anal on my detail here, this is probably a bit too much, but I enjoy doing this. I actually designed the solar system where Prism is. And I wanted something a bit unusual compared to what we used to here on Earth, where we only have one sun. And so because this was science fiction and I was getting a chance to build my own solar system, I went a bit mad and had 4 stars all orbiting each other. Ruby, Prism, Sapphire and Diamond. And if you actually now go to the Prism system in the game, this is exactly what it will look like, only properly done. Obviously with the bits and pieces. So around the Prism star, there's a whole bunch of systems. So most of the action takes place here on Keone, which is a moon of a much larger planet, Didalion, which then in turn goes around the star Prism, which in turn goes around all these other stars. So I designed a solar system, why not? I wanted it to be somewhere quite unique. And the reason it's Prism basically is that you've got multiple spectral colours to the stars, so there's lots of different colours there. So the nighttime sky on these planets should be quite interesting. I worked out roughly what type of star class. And this is actually where David Braben's astronomy stuff came in, because he was talking about this sort of stuff. And I thought, well, I've got to try and match that because. So I worked out all the stellar classes. So that's what all this B1, V, and A7B stuff means is the spectral class of the star that's associated with it. So this is probably more detail than you probably need, to be honest, but I did it anyway because I had an interest in it. So I did design the solar system and where all the action actually took place as well. Is there anything else in there? So these are the systems. I said, could I have an orbital space station called Hiram's Anchorage? It's actually named after my late father, which was designed to be an orbital space refinery. Leeson City is a spaceport on Keone, and the gazetteer, so that when you look up Prism System in the game, it should say this: Keone was a pleasant pastoral moon, yada yada yada. And in fact, I'm pretty sure if you go into Elite Dangerous now and look up the Prism System, you'll still see that description there, which comes from this original document. And that was quite cool that you could see the stuff that you've written actually turn up in the game, of course. There was an Imperial world, a Federation world, a hideout. And if you go to LP993, this is a little bit of a spoiler actually, this has never been revealed before. LP993-24 is where Octavia's hideout is. So that was never given away as a clue inside the book. Frenchia is a place where they go, and LTT 8740 is the religious enclave world where Luco got stuck for 20 years. So I worked out all the locations, put them all in. And then there's that star map as well. And then there's the timeline. So what you may need to do, take a screenshot. Yes, you can grab it on YouTube afterwards. The story in this case takes place in the year 3299, which is the year before the game starts. Now, what I do have, and I'm afraid, and I'm really sorry about this, I can't show it to you because it still is NDA. All I can show you is that it exists. And I don't know how accurate it is anymore, actually, because it's probably been replaced now. But what I did have from Frontier, as you may well know, is an official set of guides. Yeah, it's absolutely fine to take a screenshot. Nothing here is top secret anymore. So, and that's why I won't be opening these documents. So what I do actually have, and what was given to us as writers, as part of the writers' pack, was a series of documents that explained everything about the Elite Universe. So here's a really good one. This is the Elite Fiction Timelines, and that gave me all the events in the Elite Universe from basically now, 21st century, to the 34th century. Now, I was really quite grateful to have that because it meant I didn't have to make anything up. It was all written down for me. So a lot of lore development had been done by Frontier and Alan Stroud and Dave Hughes and Michael Brooks and a few other folks. And they'd all written all this stuff down. So what you had here is, this is how the Alliance works. This is how the Empire works. This is how the Federation works. This is what happened to Galcop, which is another political organization that fizzled out. This is how the military works. This is what the ships look like, at least pre the game coming out. They were mostly just sketches. A little bit about the Thargoids, and later on I got one about the Guardians, which obviously happened a little bit later in the whole thing. So those are the fiction guides that I was given, which really, really helps. Now, if you're going to write your own book, you probably don't need that much detail, but it isn't necessarily a bad idea working out a timeline of major events that go on. Because if you're going to write a series, particularly if you're working in a kind of fantasy space or a sci-fi space, if you want to write a series that spans multiple periods of time, it's definitely worth having a timeline of events that occur. Because then you don't accidentally make a mistake and contradict yourself when you go back and try and write some new stories. You can go, oh yes, the invasion of the XYZ happened in the year 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can be consistent with it, which is quite important. So all that sort of stuff does happen. So this actually came from Frontier, which was fantastic because basically all of that world building is done for you, which is quite good. The only problem with that I found as an individual writer was that I didn't always agree with some of the stuff, and I thought some of it was a bit twee, some of it I thought was quite naff, and some of it I thought was just odd. But I wasn't in charge of the law, so I couldn't change it. So being in charge of your entire environment, the world building and everything that goes around it, is much freer. But don't underestimate the amount of work you've got to do to make it compelling. It's worth spending a bit of time imaginating, if that's a word, the world that you want to build. Katrina, actually, if you're still on the thing, the work you've done with your environment is a good point here, because there's lots of fleshing out around your town, your world, that is worth actually writing down as a thing for you to use as a reference as you're writing your own stories, because it allows you to be consistent, and then you can kind of move on, go, and your characters can refer back to a bit of history that you've written down in your own lore guides, and then your readers will go, "Oh yes, I wonder what really happened in the XYZ of you know what." And you don't necessarily have to have worked out all the detail. All you need to do is refer to it consistently, and it will become part of the mythos of the story that you're writing. So I do that quite a lot. I make characters offhand refer to, "Oh yeah, do you remember when we fought off the the whoever's?" And as long as they all go, "Oh God, yeah," you don't need to necessarily give it too much more detail, but it makes the characters makes the reader think, "Oh, the characters they exist in a world that they think is real." Gives it that consistency. Quite important to kind of do that sort of stuff. So a little bit about the ships and the people and so on and so forth, and this is the other bit that's really, really crucial to the sort of stuff. If you're going to, certainly for me, anyway, if you're going to write a book that you want to plan out and you want to get it right, you need to write down the plot. So this is the kind of big thing, I suppose, for this evening, really, the detailed plot. So basically, what happens in your story, and you're not writing this to be spoilery deliberately. But this is your certainly for me, what I do is I write down exactly what happens to see if I can eradicate plot holes. So here we go. The year is 3300. The Elite Dangerous Gamer starts itself, and concerned at the excesses, off I go. So I'm actually describing here precisely what happens, kind of warts and all. There are no secrets in this version of the story. This isn't a promotional piece, saying buy this book because there's a great hero and this happens. This is just blow for blow, no emotion, what is actually happening in your story. This is absolute 100% spoilers for the story that you're intending to write. You shouldn't let this document come out before you sell your book because it completely gives the game away. The idea here, at least for me, is to write down precisely what happens in about 3 pages of A4, so that I can go from the start of the book, go through, yes, okay, that happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and then we get to the end. Wikipedia account of the story is a really good idea. That's exactly the kind of thing. So here, for example, Dolk and the other patrons, realizing the current situation is untenable, put together a plan to allow the system to collapse in a controlled fashion and frustrate the ambitions of the Federation, so they can benefit from the outcome. So I'm deliberately giving away the plot. That's precisely what I am doing here. They intend to bring Algreb's youngest daughter, Kahina Loren, into a position of power and control the system through her as a puppet ruler. So this is exactly not what you'd give away. This is for your own benefit, to make sure the plot does actually work. When you're writing the story, of course, you're not giving away this fact. You don't want, I said right at the beginning of the story, I don't want you to think the patrons are deliberately trying to do this. I want that to come out of their kind of, of course, what we will do is we'll try and move this around and move that around, and maybe Kahina would be the exact choice that we need. And then you think, what the hell are they trying to do with Kahina? And you're leaving that question in the reader. But when you're working out the story, specify precisely what is happening. So unknown to the other patrons, Dolk has his own agenda. That's exactly what you wouldn't write in a book, but it's perfect to have here. So an attack is a foregone conclusion. The Imperial Palace is overrun. The ruling family is caught and executed. Kahina is the last to be killed by Dolk, much to her horror and betrayal in front of the Reclamist leaders. So if you've read the book, you know this is what happened. The Reclamists believe they have won. So it's important to write the story at that point from the Reclamist perspective. In this case, they're supremely confident. They've beaten the Imperials. They've taken over the planet. Yay, hurrah, they've won. But, Dolk immediately has Kahina's body transferred into a waiting continuity stasis chamber where it's loaded aboard an Imperial medical ship. Their technology is so advanced that they can actually bring her back. Excuse me, just going to take a drink. Need that. It's all this talking to camera. And this is an interesting little aside. I didn't get round to updating this once I had the names. And Paul Michael Brooks was desperately banging. I shouldn't say that. Desperately desperately dragging systems into an Excel spreadsheet. I got stuck there. He was desperately trying to get this star map ready for the launch of Elite Dangerous. And it was an epic task. You know, when you look at that, all the habitable worlds in Elite Dangerous, all the ones that are not procedurally generated, Michael Brooks hand-typed every single one of those worlds into an Excel spreadsheet for the Stellar Forge to make the game. So next time you look at that, then then give Michael Brooks a well-deserved vote of thanks, because he did that manually. And I was pressurizing him, saying, "Come on, Michael, what are the names of my worlds?" Because I wasn't allowed to name them. That's one of the rules. I was only allowed to name one system, and they were naming all the others. And I kind of said, all the way through my book, I had Imperial Proxy World and Dark System TBD, Traders Guild name TBD, because I wasn't allowed to define these myself. So even at this late stage in this document that I was sending to him for approval, these placeholders were still there. I didn't have the names of the actual systems at this point. And obviously, I never went back and updated this document to take into account of them. So you can see there's still an aspect of work in progress. But Michael Brooks was really working weekends and all sorts of things right up to the last minute to try and get Elite Dangerous ready for the Gamma release. And I was still waiting for these. What's the name of the system, Michael? Because I can't finish the damn book. But we did eventually get there in the end. But I obviously never went back and updated this. So you can still see aspects of the work in progress. Anyway, pirates negotiate with Octavia. Kahina emerges, but she's got an incomplete knowledge of who she is now. So she's got muscle memory, she can speak, and her key mannerisms are intact, but she's got no memory of her events. Hassan is unable to determine who she is. She doesn't know where she comes from, so he names her Salome after his sister's cat. Which I quite like the name Salome at the time, so that's where that kind of came from. So anyway, all sorts of stuff going on. So this is really your master document. And if I just pop up briefly the one for that I'm working on for Shadewood, just to compare and contrast. I'm not going to show you this for too long because spoilers, but so again, book 3, what I'm doing here is I'm color coding the bits that I've written, and I haven't written half of it so far, so you can see that I'm still working on those sort of bits there. And that's the way I work out what I'm doing, going through the story. I'm kind of like, I've done that bit, I've done that bit, I've done that bit. So it's a really specific guide to how to write your novel. That's the way I kind of do it. And the other one that's important is the immediate backstory. So what happened just before your story starts? And again, Katrina, this will probably be interesting to you because I think we've had this conversation about where do you start the story? You've got the bit that you're really excited about telling, but there has to be some preamble to those events. Because stories don't just start. There must have been something that got them into the place that they're in. Are they in a crisis? Are they in an emergency? Or is something boiling away? What kicked that off? So you've got to choose the point at which your story starts. But there is always a prehistory to it. And hi there, Apex Firethorn. Good to see you, sir, or lady, or whoever you might be. I can't prejudge these things. I commented last time actually that I'm absolutely hopeless at thinking up funky usernames. I just give up and call them Drew Wagar. But anyway, you're very welcome whoever you are. That's good to see you. What happened before? And again, you can see Imperial Proxy World TBD, and I particularly like this one actually. Some significant claim prior to settlement. I hadn't worked out what that was going to be, but they did work it out later on. So what happened before? One of our Zion's friends. Excellent, good. Good to see you. Good to see you. And then probably one of the most important bits of documentation that you need. Now, if you're going to sell your book to an agent or a publisher, you will need one of these. This is a synopsis. So again, this is kind of like the detailed plot, but you must get it onto a single page of A4. So your entire book, which, in the case of Elite Reclamation, it was about 125,000 words. Your entire book summarized onto one page. This is a really, really crucial thing that you will need to have in order to promote your book. So the synopsis of Elite Reclamation there is basically this. Although I didn't get it onto one page, as you can see. I need to work on that. Maybe I need to shrink the font down. The year is 3300. Prism's an isolated star system. It's important. It's ruled by an imperial family. The leader goes nuts. The patrons revolt. Dolk, Torgin, kills Kahina, trying to put things right. Kahina gets stolen. There's an evil baddie, Octavia, in a hideout. She gets brought back to life. The Reclamists lose control of Prism. There's a chase across the stars trying to get Kahina back. She crash lands and ends up in a religious cult. She's rescued by Luco. Hassan and Dolk get tortured when they're trying to find Kahina. Luco helps her find her true origin. Salome gets very upset about discovering her true origin and decides that she wants to take back her system. There's a massive, massive battle. Salome returns, kills all the people who tried to steal her system, and then eventually turns on Dolk and kills him. And then she leaves for the frontier in the year 3301 AD. Again, absolute spoilers in this. This is not a document you give out for public consumption. But if you're selling your book for any kind of reason to a publisher or an agent, they want to know precisely what your story is about. So they can look through it and go, is that something that we would be interested in publishing as a story? So it's not for promotional use in the sense that this is the sort of stuff you would put in a brochure or a blurb or a back cover piece of text. This is basically pitching your book to a publisher. Now, to answer the question there from Terra Firma, how does it differ from the previous one? The synopsis is for the publisher or the agent. It's basically the shortest possible description of exactly what happens in your book for the purposes of hopefully getting them excited about publishing it. That's all the synopsis is for. The detailed plot is your guide. Have I written a decent story? So can I write down all the machinations and the complexities of my politics and so on and so forth to make sure I haven't got any plot holes? So to give you an example of a plot hole that I did run into. So, the problem I've got here is in the earlier drafts of Elite Reclamation, I wanted to have these politicians kind of using the three daughters as as kind of bargaining chips. They say, well, we don't like the current senator. He's got three daughters. Why don't we kill off the senator and then we can kind of take over one of the daughters and rule through her? We can't rule ourselves because that's not the way the politics works. So they've got the line, if you like, they've got the family line. But if we can manipulate one of them, then we're in charge without actually technically being in charge. So that was the way the politics were supposed to run. Because what I had is I started with these three daughters. And I wrote it quite well. I was quite happy with it until the problem came up with the plot hole that I'd got quite a long way down the story and suddenly realised that I'd chosen the wrong daughter because obviously the third daughter is the least senior in the line and that's not the one they would have gone for because the other two were senior. So Kahina has two sisters, or did have two sisters, who were older than her, and the oldest one, the first sister, would be the one that would succeed in terms of the power of the Prism system. So I'd got quite a long way down and thought, damn, I've written that wrong. Although there were other good reasons for having it as the third daughter. Actually, I'd written a problem there because, and so what I did is I went back and thought, okay, well, how do I get rid of the other two sisters? Because it needs to be the third one for reasons that I've already kind of used. So I had a choice. Either I rewrite it and switch it back to the first sister, which I didn't really want to do because I'd kind of established some of the other characters. And if I made it the first sister, then I wouldn't be able to have Kahina having the kind of inferiority complex that she had as the third sister, which gave her some good characterization. So I wanted Kahina to be kind of, I've got two older sisters. They're always going to be more important than me. I'm never going to amount to anything. I'm just sitting here waiting to be married off. That was sort of the sympathy vote that I was aiming for from her perspective. But she would not be the one that would get put in the position of power because she didn't actually have the line from her father. The other two would get it before she would, and the oldest one would be the natural choice. So I had a problem. I had a plot hole, basically. The politics didn't suit the story I was writing. So I had two choices. I could either rewrite it for the first one. That gave me the problem of losing the sympathy vote for Kahina because she was no longer the put-upon third daughter. Or I kill off the first and second daughters in some ghastly fashion, which is the one I ended up for because I thought that would be fun. I like killing people. So unfortunately for the first and second sisters, They died a horrible death at the hands of the revolutionaries that took over the system, and Kahina was the only one left. So therefore, she became the correct political choice. And then I thought, I could make this even more cunning. Why don't I get the patrons to be so clever at scheming that they actually planned that the two older daughters get killed, so they end up with the third one? And that's what I ended up with writing into the plot. And when you write out the detailed plot, your first version of it will kind of work, and then you'll go, yeah, that bit there is not quite right. Can I make that a bit better? And then you go through this process. Okay, yeah, hang on, I can kill off the two older sisters. That's great. And then, actually, maybe I can make the patrons scheme about that from day one. And then you start to increase the complexity of your plot. So what I ended up with is an opening scene with the patrons going, yes, well, of course, what we could do, we could choose the third one. Okay, well, hang on, we can't do the third one. Well, wouldn't it be terrible if some sort of unfortunate accident happened to the older, and you get that sort of horrible, political manipulation stuff going on, which actually gives them some character as well. So they're seen to be just playing with people's lives because they have the power to do so. And a quote there, Commander Unrealization, I like getting people. Yes, well, that's the beauty of being a writer, is you can do all the things that you're not allowed to do in real life. You can make people's lives an absolute misery. And again, conversation with Katrina earlier in the week. You put your characters in ghastly situations. Give them, don't give them a moment's peace. Put them in drama. Put them in arguments. Put them in passion. Put them in, life-threatening situations, because that's what the readers really lap up. And a lot of people, I think, certainly from the first bit, liked the Kahina character because you felt sorry for her. Then you felt, she's actually really nasty. She's unpleasant. And then you felt sorry for her again. And then you kind of like, actually, she's just seen her entire family slaughtered in front of her eyes. This poor girl's now got reason to be upset. Then she gets killed or stabbed in the heart, and she gets brought back to life, and she hasn't got a memory. And so she's all this stuff happens to her. So you kind of end up rooting for her, even though she's actually not a particularly nice individual in many, many ways. And this is the trick. This is a really good point, Terraform, you're making actually on the chat, is that as you're coming up with those ideas, you write them into this detailed plot. And then you read back your detailed plot and go, does that work? Because if that happens, then doesn't that break this? And I find it far, far better to work out all the problems in this document before I start writing the story, because it's cheaper time-wise to fix the problems here. So if you have killed somebody off, or you think, actually, I need to go back and change that, then all you've got to do here is maybe change a few paragraphs to fix the story. If you're doing that at the point where you've written about 4 or 5 chapters of your book, then you may have an entire chapter to revise. And plot holes that can be pretty subtle. They can sneak up on you. So I try and work out all the inconsistencies. Okay, well, hang on. Well, if they're going to do that, for example, I quite wanted the scene here where the ruling family is caught and executed by the Reclamist leaders. Great scene to write, but why? Why would the Reclamists do something so, so blatant? Because what you've got to think about it here is the Imperials are a mighty, mighty political force of thousands of starships and multiple systems all the place. If you're going to get them cross, that's not a good that's not a good recipe for survival. You've got to have a reason for them taking that risk. What is that reason? Well, the reason is, in Reclamation, that the Empire's beginning to distance itself from the Imperial Senator here because he's gone a bit nuts. So they actually want him to be kind of getting rid of, but they can't do it themselves because of Imperial politics. There's no way another Imperial Senator can be seen to be interfering in another Senator's affairs. So they would sponsor some terrorists to do it kind of on their behalf, but make sure they're completely and utterly disassociated with the event. So then when these Reclamists go and destroy the Imperial family, then they can go, "Oh, that's terrible. That's appalling. It's appalling. Shocking. Well, who's going to take over the planet then?" And you can you can jump into that sort of thing. And that's the sort of nuance that you want. You want to make sure that everything that happens in your story has a sensible reason. That people don't just blow things up for the sake of blowing things up. There's a kind of, we can get away with that because of something else that we've already established in the story. So when I was looking at killing all the leaders, I said, that's a really great scene, I really want to write that. But I have to go back in the story to figure out what's the justification for that happening in the story, and then make sure it kind of all makes sense as a plot. That's what that detailed plot thing is all about. Oh, and hello, Nat. It's good to see you, my dear. Lovely to see you. Lovely to see you. Welcome aboard. And that's another thing for writers who are starting out. It's quite a good idea. Nothing wrong with it. I'm just going to switch my light on. Just notice the light level in here is dropping really right fast. There we go. You can come up with some really, really good scenes. So, for example, in one of my current books, I've got this idea where I want to have these people trying to clamber onto this boat. And they're sort of desperately struggling to climb up this ladder, and they realise that neither of them are going to make it up until they sort of cooperate and get up it. I want to write that scene just because it's in my head. But then you've got to think, why the hell are they in that situation in the first place? And then work it back. So don't just write good scenes. Get the idea for the scene, stick it in a document like this, and then go back and go, okay, why did they get there? What happened before? What happened before? What happened before? And then try and make it flow. So go back and forth for your detailed plot. Read it again, put it aside for a couple of days, then read it again, because the plot hole will then jump out at you and go, oh my God, why on earth is so-and-so doing that? He's got no justification for doing that at all. Or he knows something that he shouldn't know as a character because you as the sort of narrator have kind of put that thought in his head. Go backwards and forwards through it. And I find it much better to do it here than when I'm actually writing the story. Try and work it out in advance. It may help you make a better story as well. So that's quite good fun. And then, so that goes on for quite a long time, that particular one. So it's really, really quite detailed to make sure that kind of stuff worked. And then this is the other stuff that I did. So I did show you Space Engine, I think, in an earlier episode. But I do find the visual stuff really good. So in sci-fi, this is quite easy. So I actually manufactured the solar system because Elite Dangerous didn't exist at the time. Because it didn't have the game as a reference. So I was able to create my own sort of CGI of the places that I wanted to go to in the story, and just to help me kind of bring it to life a little bit. So see, here are some of the kind of places, a beautiful moon in orbit around an ocean planet, and some of the other more barren kind of places, and so on and so forth. So I kind of did that sort of stuff as well. And if I show you, I think I've got them here. Where are we? Do a little research. There we go. So there's various bits and pieces in here as well. Some of these actually you may not have seen. So let's start with some of the images here. Not that one. So this was a screenshot from one of the early Elite Dangerous concept art. This is from the Damocles video. Showing the cockpit of the spaceship. This is, again, some early concept art of cargo hold. So I was using this to kind of get a feeling for what's it like sitting in the cargo hold of a spaceship. Be racks and racks of canisters and stuff lying about. One of the early trading screens. Actually, Elite Dangerous never ended up looking like this at all. So they're quite interesting to look at now, kind of in hindsight. But this is what we had at the time to kind of inform our a view of what the game was going to be like. And it's useful as a writer because you could kind of go, okay, that's what it feels like, that's what it's going to look like. There's a very early inside of a spaceship. I think that's the Cobra, before the seats were done. So again, some of the early concept art from the game was quite useful. There's an initial picture of one of the ships. One of the iconic shots of a ship flying through an asteroid field towards Earth. It gives you a feel for what the game's going to be like, and therefore what the book was going to be like. There's a very obvious early one, an in-game shot, and that's one of the early shots of what the cockpit in Elite Dangerous was going to look like. Interesting enough, for those of you who remember, where is the alpha? So these are screenshots I took from the alpha build of Elite Dangerous when I finally got it, and this was in the last few weeks of me finalising the story. So I was able then to compare the way I imagined stuff in the book with what the actual game looked like. So this was alpha phase 1.0. This is the really, really early stuff. So you can see what the cockpit looked like back then, and how the game has changed since. But a lot of the concepts were still the same. So I was able at last to go, okay, what I've written in the book, does it match up with how the game is? Um, and I did have to make quite a few editing changes as a result of what I saw here. So yeah, some nice features like the canopy exploding and getting chucked out into space and all those kind of things. So that's quite good as well. And then some of the early shots of the ships flying around, asteroids, and let's we'll see some of the stuff there. There you go. That was what the launcher looked like back in the alpha. A bit of history for you, which is quite cool. And then the other stuff I did mention. Oh, where's the high res artwork? So this is the high res stuff that I worked out. So again, I mentioned before that I was a very visual thing. I find this very useful. So this is Dolk Torgan, an image I captured from back then. Kind of give you. This is actually a scene I did write into the book specifically based on this image. So I got this image. So I love this image. It's really, really atmospheric. And there were lots of features from this, like the rain, that I wanted in. So if you remember in Elite Reclamation, there's a scene where basically Dolk tries to stop Kahina taking off. He fails. She takes off, and he captures Hassan. And basically, in the middle of this thunderstorm, he's basically saying, "You're coming with me, or else." And that was deliberately inspired by this particular picture. And kind of gave me the vibe that I wanted for Dolk. He kind of like, no messing around, dark trench coaty kind of guy, very moody, and that's the kind of wide angle version of that. That's the cover of the book and the artwork that we put together to generate it. There's the high resolution one of Hassan, kind of giving you his the view on the world. This is another one of Kahina, which I quite like. This is a stock shot of just a sort of posh dining room, really, but kind of gave me that imperial vibe. Snooty, arrogant, posh, overbearing, but kind of quite dressy and quite impressive sort of appearance. Then there was the more militaristic bit, so Kahina could use a sword. So I kind of wanted an image that helped me kind of like that. So I had this kind of dueling tradition, and it was more a katana-style weapon that she favoured. And then actually this was a piece of fan art that somebody did for me, which was quite cool. So I've just obviously stored in that folder. That's another stock shot that I used. In fact, that one's been used by quite a few different authors now, which is quite interesting. And then kind of a sort of Greco-Roman shot. This is supposedly Kahina's two sisters, just to kind of give me something to write against when I was kind of describing. I find if I'm writing descriptions, and again, don't overdo description when you're writing, but just use something. The idea behind these two was they were kind of, quite vapid, irritating pair of women, but obviously very beautiful and charming and da-da-da-da. But it's quite useful to have that sort of insipid beauty there as a kind of thing to write against. Good old Luco again, so sort of charming Italian kind of chap. Another shot of what we may have looked for as Octavia for. So she's a brutal woman who's clearly very, very sure of herself. That was another alternative version. And then Mobius, dear Mobius, mocked this up for me. So he grabbed a lot of these images off me at one of the, I think, LaveCons actually, and then give me this sort of DVD cover version of the story, which was quite fun, which actually was pretty cool. And then this was another shot of the same actor with the same gun in a kind of smoky, moody sort of film noir type scene. But this was kind of giving me the idea for the Reclamists. So they're a bunch of sort of tough dudes who've obviously seen a bit of action and clearly have kind of revolution in mind to kind of take things on. So those are the sort of things I used for that sort of stuff. I do that a lot. Actually, if I show you the Shadewood stuff as well, which is something that currently I'm working on, you can see here I've got artwork here as well. So a lot of the characters, this one is actually a shot that I took when I was visiting a castle in Luxembourg of one of my cousins actually sitting in a window looking out, and I kind of used that as an idea of this, extrapolated from it, used it as a kind of portal from girls stuck in a castle that she can't escape, and I kind of then did a sort of slightly sepia toned version of it to kind of give me the inspiration. So I find that artwork is very, very good for helping discussions as well. And then I had an old priestess here, sort of wise wise woman who is clearly old, and I wanted to kind of use that. And looking at it, you kind of things jump out at you like the wrinkled face and the grey hair and the long sort of 100-yard stare and all that kind of thing. Any shots of the old woman? That's a good question. Have I got one? Did I do that? I don't think I did her as an old woman, actually. Did I? That would be under premonition if there was one. Images. I don't think I did. No. So I did have ideas. Where's Elite Saga? There it is. So she certainly appeared in Curcio. So actually, for those of you who don't know, this was a fan fiction series that I did, which had the original Elite world where there were all sorts of sentient creatures in it. So I had a sort of sentient dinosaur called Derek. And that's another picture of him. He was a slightly dapper sort of velociraptor type character, which was quite good fun to write for. And then I had that would be Rebecca from that period of time. That would be a sort of stock shot of that one. Various versions of that. Oh, look, Thargoids, scary. And then that would probably be another shot. These are sort of kind of working pictures that I didn't use, but kind of left for reference. Thargoids, as I originally envisioned them, sort of praying mantis type things. So again, lots of imagery there around that sort of stuff. And then I had a kind of creature that was a little bit like the T somethings out of Terminator 3, I think those are. So kind of wanted that effect as well. So lots of stuff there that kind of crosses over and uses various different things. But yeah, so sometimes imagery is really good for that sort of stuff. Sometimes imagery is really, really good. So just as a little way to finish this off, so that really is kind of an overview of plotting. So I keep that all in one document because I go back and reference it when I'm writing. So what does that character do again? And what ships have I used? And how do you pronounce things? And cantankerous old lady. There we go. And that's Rebecca from Elite Reclamation. Of course, she wasn't named in Elite Reclamation at the time. So those kind of things in there. I use that document to drive my writing. But I also use it for all the design of everything else. So little potential minor spoilers here for Elite Dangerous. So under Reclamation, one of the things that I did do, as you know, is I embedded a mystery in Elite Reclamation where they encounter this strange old woman in a hospital, and she leads them on this little quest, which was a setup for a potential second book, but it was also a mystery that got embedded into the game. And Frontier had asked on the Writers' Forum, what are those mysteries supposed to be? And so what I did here was I wrote the Formidine Rift quest. And so, again, in true kind of writing style, I came up with what is the Formidine Rift quest actually about. And so this document is way back 2015, and it was kind of the Formidine Rift quest, a proposal Frontier develops, Da Vinci Code in space, just what I was sort of aiming at. And this particular one was the first one. I did several others after this to kind of get around some of the problems that I felt the game had back then, which was, very wide in scope but not so deep in content. Lots of other people have said that since. Tends to favour people with plenty of in-game time available, allowing them access to best ships. Most game mechanics are of the do task, gain credits, rinse and repeat variety. Elite could challenge players on a more intellectual basis, and the sense that the EDU universe should be full of mystery but feels a bit empty. So that's what I was trying to do with the Formidine Rift mystery. And the quest in this document took about 30 hours to write, should run for about 8 to 10 weeks. The entire quest should take 18 months to 2 years to run its course, so on and so forth. This was the kind of idea I pitched at the end of Reclamation to say this is the sort of stuff that we could potentially put in the game. What is it composed of? Well, it kind of references old stuff from the lore of Elite. It takes place in a certain space in the galaxy. I think down here somewhere I've got the there we go, roughly where the Formidine Rift was. So we could kind of plot out how the stuff was interacting, and roughly then what happened. And we have distress calls, abandoned ships, and wreckage, and all the sorts of stuff that you would want in a mystery to kind of act as the various bits and pieces as well. So that's the sort of stuff that I did. And again, plotting all out the detail, and then working out, does it work? Does it like this? Does this fit? Kind of all that sort of stuff. That's important stuff in there as well. So plan works for me, and it helps to make sure your story has a little bit more depth. And one of the things that I've had, particularly with Elite Reclamation, is players have come back to me, time and time again, said your book just felt like it had that little bit more behind it than some of the other books. And that's an entirely subjective opinion. But it's come back to me often enough that I feel the effort I put into designing the plot and going, does that really make sense? Is it, is there a plot hole there? What happens about this? Can I interlace that so it points back to this future event or refers back to something in the past or introduces a little bit of lore? All those little movements and tweaks and kind of more forward and backward flips in the story, readers appreciate it. They really appreciate the fact that there's that little extra depth. What was Drew thinking of when he put that in? Does he mean something by that, or is that just something that he's written in? And sometimes it's just something I've written in that I thought sounded cool. But more often than not, I've deliberately put something in to make you go back to think, did we hear about something like that in chapter 2? And it keeps your brain engaged, which makes for a potentially more fun story. And for the Formidine Rift thing, it was kind of like, okay, well, we've got this opportunity. Here's the book. We could dump something into the game as well to make the players go, hang on, are the games connected to the book? And are the clues in the game that are in the book, or is the book telling us in the game? It's a mystery. And that was kind of, let's go play the game. That was the idea behind it, and try and have some fun with that kind of thing. So it was good fun writing that. So in summary then, you don't have to do it this way. And I stressed that right at the beginning. You don't have to do it this way. If you want to write by the seat of your pants and just go for it, that's absolutely fine. Some of the best books that have ever been written have been written like that. There's no guarantee, this is not a recipe for success. This is just what works for me. And what I've found from it is that, I get perhaps a better depth of characterization, a better depth of plot, and a slightly more grounded in reality feel to the world that I'm building than I would otherwise have in a story. So when you read a book and you go through it, and sometimes you think, yeah, this author's really got some good ideas, but for some reason it's not quite suspending my disbelief, because there's something in this that just doesn't feel like it's quite there. It's almost like looking at a stage and going, yeah, I can see where the supports are, And if I look around the back of the scenery, then it's all going to look horrible. If you can build it out that little bit more so that the people who are reading it can't see behind your props, that's sort of the best analogy I can give. Your readers will think, there's so much more to this world. I want to stay in this place and learn more about it. And particularly, I think, in fantasy, or if you're writing a series of books in the same place, you really want to establish some of the parameters of your world fairly early on and make sure you've kind of got that consistency. Because there's nothing that readers will pick apart faster than, hang on, you didn't call it that in the first book. You've renamed it. Why have you done that? And it might be you've just, oh gosh, when I was writing that, I forgot. But if you've got a reference, you can go back and do it. Great one from Cleonimus there, Lord of the Rings. I mean, Tolkien spent years, really. I mean, he went completely over the top. He built an entire language. In fact, I think he started with the language, and then everything else came out of it. Massive amounts of world building, maps and stories of characters that will never ever be referenced anywhere else to set up the mythology. That might be a bit excessive. You may not have time for that, but certainly pay some attention to what happened beforehand. Again, if I go back to Shadewood here, the one I'm working on right now, I've got a map here. I've got a geographical map. That's what the landscape looks like from space. I've got a landscape topographical map that I've made, so I know roughly where things are in relation to each other, and I know how the navigation works. And then I put the two together and worked out, the locations of the major cities, how the navigation works here, which is something that's revealed in the story. So names for the key areas, and I know where they are in relation to each other, so I know how long it takes to get there. You can't travel from, in this case, Amaris to Serenia without having to go quite a long way across the sea. That's an important plot point, because you can't just suddenly magically go, okay, well, I'm going to just move my characters from here to here, and your readers will be going, Yeah, but that's like 600 miles across the sea. How do they do that? You know, unless you've got that in your head and you've worked out some of the details. The same way, you know, I said in the previous one, do your homework around what isn't possible. You know, the classic one for fantasy stories is having the unrealistic horse, um, whereby you know, people treat their horse like a car, and you just drive it for 40 miles, and then give it a brief stop and drive it for 40 miles again. You can't do that with a horse. It just won't do that. You know, you can ride a horse for maybe 20, 25 miles a day, and then that's it. You know, you need to recharge it overnight. It's not like a car, and people kind of forget that. They don't do enough homework on what you can and can't do with a horse or a pack animal or something to make the story of their quest realistic. So just stuff like that's definitely worth working out. But just the lay of the land, you know, this land that you've got, draw a map of it, and then if there's a mountain, then your characters are going to have to go around that mountain, and that gives you, it gives you a story in itself. So all that stuff is there to be done. So I find planning works really, really well for the sort of stories I write. It allows me to make a more complicated political story, allows my characters to kind of grow and develop and have crises that lead them on to other, scenarios. It allows me to check that I haven't got any kind of obvious plot holes, and also don't get stuck with a situation where I think, oh, I've written a really, really good scene, and oh, what happens next? And then you kind of, it may help you avoid writer's block, because you may get really, really into a particular scene. You're tapping away and really enjoying it, and then you get stuck because you don't actually know what happens next. You're kind of waiting for your inspiration to strike. Whereas with a plan, at least you can go, oh yes, well, what happens next is, because I've already worked it out. And then the only problem you've got is just motivating yourself to write the less interesting bits and then get back onto the cool stuff that you've got there. The really stuff for. So I find it helps smooth that whole process around. Your mileage may vary. I'm certainly not saying it's the only way to do it, but that's definitely a thing. So that is, goodness me, I'm an hour and a half. I was supposed to do this for an hour, but I like waffling on, so there we go. So thank you again very much for joining me on this one. I hope you found that interesting. More than happy to take any questions on so on and so forth. And thank you for everything that you've been chucking in. Good name for a book, The Unrealistic Horse. Yes, that'd be quite a sort of fantasy spoof novel. That would be quite good fun. I put, and they said one thing to take away. I mean, for some of you, you may think, bloody hell, that's an awful lot of work just to write a book. And you may be thinking, that's a bit intimidating. I don't think I need to do that. Only do as much planning as you need to do what you need to do. I had this idea that I might be writing sequels to Elite, and obviously I did one with Shadewood. I know it's going to be 4 books, so I need to have the whole thing kind of into it. If you're only writing a single book, you don't need to go into that much detail. So don't feel that you have to do everything that I did there. I just kind of did stuff from that perspective because I felt I needed to. I've only done as much as I needed. Only do as much as you think you need to do. Don't feel that you've got to copy all the work that I do. And there'll be other authors do a lot more than I do. I've only done what I felt actually required. So do as much as you think you need to do. Once you've done this amount of pre-planning, do you find the actual writing narrative easy in quotes? Yes. I've never encountered writer's block in the kind of classic sense. I have got stuck on the detailed plot, however, which I think is probably my equivalent of writer's block. And I think writer's block was mostly down to the fact that you're writing, because you've got this really cool idea. And you get to the end of that cool idea, and then you're going, what happens next? And I need to get from here to over there, but I can't figure out how to do it. My characters have come out of this difficult situation, and now they're sort of in this post-difficult situation scene, and I don't know what to do with them. And I get stuck, and you're sort of staring at a blank page. Now, I do that in the detailed plot, but I'm only looking at a few paragraphs of text at that point, so I can usually come up with something. And I've usually worked out all the wrinkles in my detailed plot before I start writing. So when I write, I'm just looking at detailed plot going, yep, done that bit, need to do this. Oh, just come up with an extra idea. Can I slot that in here? I'll tweak the detailed plot a little bit, make sure it still works, and then add it in, and keep writing. So you probably notice, if you've been following me for a few years, that I generally publish a word count every few days or few weeks or something, and I can do that because I've got the plan, and therefore I just keep writing against that plan. And I usually do 3,000 or 4,000 words a week, and that works quite metronomically for me. So it definitely makes it easier for me. it may it may not for you. Sorry, can I ask, not writing related to more ED, is Rebecca Tiley from Elite? Is Rebecca from Reclamation? Yes, she is. So that was me being a little bit naughty back when I wrote Reclamation, because I didn't know there was going to be any other Elite books after Reclamation. So I thought, how can I sneakily fudge a few things from my fan fiction, which was the Elite saga, into the official kind of canon of Elite. And the old woman in the hospital was therefore Rebecca from Elite, but she wasn't named as Rebecca in Reclamation, because I thought the censors of Frontier might come down and wipe her out. So she was slightly incognito, but yes, she is the same character. Biggest problem has always been figuring out what actually happens in the world that I end up dreaming up. Do you have any advice regarding that? What works for me is that I come up with some characters and I put them in a dramery type scene. So put them in some peril, put them in some argument, put them in some, depending on what you like to write, a fight, or a passionate love scene, or whatever it happens to be that you want to write. What sort of stuff gets you? A fight is a good one, or some sort of peril where they're dangling off the edge of a cliff or something like that. Start with that. Come up with some scenes that you think, yeah, that'd be great fun to write. I just want to write a scene where, someone's dangling off a cliff, and won't they fall, or will they get rescued and pull them to safety, or they fall, and then cut. Write a dramery scene that will get the creative juices flowing, and then go, okay, well, why are they in that situation in the first place? What happened before that? And then you can kind of then extrapolate off, what sort of person are they? Why would they be hanging over a cliff in the first place? All those kind of things, and just kind of iterate out from there. You may find that gives you enough to kind of start going. Certainly with a lot of my books, I kind of brainstorm early on, what sort of fun scenes do I want? So for Elite Reclamation, I wanted a shock. I wanted the heroine to be stabbed to death. That was a really early consideration. I wanted her to be dead early on, and for all the readers to go, her? Yeah, so that was an initial consideration. Clearly, I wanted a space fight scene, so I kind of did some initial work around that. And I also fancied the idea, because Elite Dangerous had been gone for 30 years after the original game, I thought I wanted that sort of poignant, let's bring Elite back after a really big interruption, which is why there is that scene on with Luco with his dilapidated Cobra Mark III spaceship having sat there for 20 years not being used. It was sort of a kind of, let's just remind everybody that we've been waiting for Elite for a long, long time, and there's Luco waiting to fly his spaceship again. So that was the reason for those scenes, and then I kind of extrapolated out there and built out the whole plot. So give scene writing with some characters a try. That may help. Biggest problem is not writing, having the ideas but then picking at them, not good enough instead of just getting it down on paper. There's no alternative but to get them down. I give that advice to everybody who asks me, is if you want to write. The only way to get better is to keep trying it. You'll get more and more into the habit of it the more you do. So if you only just pencil down a paragraph or a few hundred words tops a day, just do it. You'll find you'll do more of it bit by bit. The important thing is just to keep writing. Doesn't matter whether it's good or bad. Just write something, because you'll get into the habit of doing it, and then it'll explode from there. So that's kind of the advice on that one. But that's good. That's really cool questions. So thank you very much indeed. I will let you go back to your evenings now, because we're seriously over time. But there's nothing wrong with that. That's good. Quite enjoy extra stuff. We've got plenty of material here to be getting through. So hopefully that was useful at some level as well. So thank you all for coming along. Really appreciate your patronage of the stream, shall we say. How about that? And I hope you're finding it interesting. It's a bit different, obviously, from your classic gaming stream, but hopefully useful. And so we'll keep doing this on the Monday evening for a little while. I definitely will be here next week. I think after that, I've actually got a couple of weeks holidays, so I may not be streaming then, but we'll be back after that. So that's kind of all good stuff. And thank you very much. Good to see that you're enjoying it. And I say, if you've got anything you want discussed, chuck it at me on Facebook or Twitter. I'll make a note of it, and we'll get through some of those bits as well. So, and don't kill too many people. You wait till you read Shaper 3. No spoilers. But yes, and actually that's one last piece of advice. If you're going to kill a character, and this is a little bit George R.R. Martin, but if you are going to kill a character or blow something up, make sure there's a reason to care about it before you do it, okay? Because there's nothing more, heart-wrenching for a reader than to lose a character they care about. But there's nothing more sort of meh about a character that dies that you don't really know who they are, or a place where you haven't actually learnt what it's like or what it's about to kind of mourn the fact that it's gone. So build it up before you break it down is a good piece of advice too. Anyway, I shall sign off. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and I will see you all next week. And take care, folks. All the best. Yeah, red shirts in Star Trek. That's exactly right. Don't do red shirts unless you're writing Star Trek. Take care, folks. It's been great. Thank you very much indeed. See you soon.